Benny and Josh Safdie, two brothers, two solo films, both sports movies, and both centred on obsessive men who keep making the worst possible decisions. On paper, these films feel almost like mirrors of one another. Both feature non-traditional actors alongside major stars, both explore how competition becomes identity, but once you sit with them, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Because one of these films feels like a direct continuation of the Safdie energy we've come to love, and the other feels like a filmmaker deliberately stepping away from it. So after watching both Marty Supreme and The Smashing Machine, who actually came out on top? What's fascinating to me is how closely aligned these projects are at their foundation. Both The Smashing Machine and Marty Supreme are sports films, but not in the traditional sense. They're not about victory, they focus on obsession. They follow men who define themselves entirely by what they do, even when that definition is destroying them. Both films also continue a classic Safdie move, populating their worlds with people who don't feel like actors. Whether that's fighters, athletes, or real world personalities, the goal is the same. Authenticity over polish, and presence over performance. This overlap matters because it shows that even after the split, the Safdies are still drawing from the same creative toolkit. The divergence isn't in subject matter, it's in execution. So let's start with Benny Safdie and The Smashing Machine. I think the defining word for The Smashing Machine is muted. It's not empty, it's not lifeless, but in a restrained way that immediately sets it apart from what we've come to expect from the Safdies. The most noticeable difference is camera movement. Where earlier Safdie films felt like they were physically attached to their protagonists, constantly pushing, circling and suffocating, the Smashing Machine pulls back. The camera observes more than it attacks. There's still close-ups, there's still stylistic flourishes, but the film refuses to overwhelm you. Instead, it watches. That observational quality changes everything. You're no longer trapped inside Mark Kerr's panic in the way you were trapped inside Howard Ratner's or Connie Nikas' desperation. You're witnessing Kerr's deterioration from a distance, emotionally and visually. And that feels intentional. Benny Safdie isn't trying to replicate the chaos of Good Time or Uncut Gems. If anything, he seems actively resistant to it. This restraint becomes even more striking when you consider the subject matter. MMA is brutal, physically punishing, and most of all, violent. Yet the film doesn't exploit that brutality for adrenaline. Instead, it softens it. The violence is there, but it's framed almost as background noise to something more fragile. That contrast, brutality paired with sensitivity, is where the film is at its most interesting. Dwayne Johnson is genuinely strong here. Stripped of his movie star swagger, he feels vulnerable, uncertain, and quietly exhausted. It's a performance built on internalization, rather than spectacle. But that same restraint can also create distance. You understand Kerr, you empathise with him, but you don't always feel him. And if you come into this film loving the overwhelming sensory assault of classic Safdie filmmaking, that distance can be frustrating, even if you respect what the film is doing. So let's talk about Josh Safdie and Marty Supreme. For me, Marty Supreme goes in the opposite direction to The Smashing Machine. From the moment it starts, the film is completely immersive, almost aggressively so. The camera has the Safdie's signature tight spacing, the world feels loud, alive and unstable. This is a film that wants you inside its protagonist, not watching him from afar. And that's why, for many people, it feels like the more recognisable Safdie film. His performance feels spiritually aligned with Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems. Not in terms of personality, but in psychology. Marty Mauser and Howard Ratner are cut from the same cloth. They're men who make selfish choices, ignore every warning sign, and dig themselves deeper into holes with absolute confidence. They're constantly in motion, convinced that the next move will fix everything, even as it clearly makes things worse. Chalamet captures that beautifully. He's magnetic, irritating, charming, but most of all, he's exhausting. and crucially, he feels like a character who belongs in the Safdie universe. Marty Supreme doesn't just depict obsession, it replicates it. The pacing, the sound design, the camera movement all work together to create a sense of forward momentum that never quite lets you breathe. It's exhilarating, it's stressful, and if you love uncut gems and good time, it feels like a natural continuation of that lineage. That's why even though both films are strong, Marty Supreme lands a bit harder emotionally and viscerally. So really, it all comes down to observational versus immersion. I think the differences in Marty Supreme and the Smashing Machine boils down to this. The Smashing Machine is observational, whilst Marty Supreme is immersive. Benny Safdie pulls back to let you study his character, whilst Josh Safdie pushes you in and traps you alongside him. Neither approach is inherently better, but if your emotional connection to the Safdies comes from that suffocating, anxiety-inducing immersion, the sense that you're spiralling alongside the character, then Marty Supreme is always going to hit harder. That doesn't make the Smashing Machine any lesser, it just means it's playing a different game. So it would be easy from here to frame this as proof that Josh Safdie has won their breakup, but I don't think that's what it proves. What they actually reveal is a difference in creative instinct. Josh Safdie seems more interested in style, immersion, and leaning into what the Safdie name represents at this point. Whilst Benny Safdie seems more interested in sensitivity, emotional quiet, and showing some restraint over the chaos. Together, their instincts balance each other out, and apart they have become more pronounced. And that's not a failure, it's just clarity. It feels like Benny appears increasingly drawn to acting as well, and the Smashing Machine feels like the work of someone more interested in emotional presence than cinematic aggression. Josh meanwhile seems committed to refining and basically evolving what the Safdie filmmaker language is itself at this point. So overall, I love both films, but Marty Supreme is the one I prefer, because I just love uncut gems and good time style of filmmaking, the immersion, the chaos, and that relentless momentum. The Smashing Machine is probably more emotional, more mutive, and far more reflective. And there's real value in that, especially when paired with such a brutal subject. This isn't about one brother being better than the other. It's about two filmmakers revealing what they want to pursue going forward. And to me, that's very exciting. If this is the start of two distinct Safdie paths, then I'm interested in both. Because the real story isn't who won, it's how differently they choose to evolve.